Hello.
Hi, Lois.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, Liz. Liz just asked if you were there.
Hello.
Hey, Linda.
Hey, hi, guys.
Hi, I'm getting my homage.
Oh, I guess I should get two and stop reading other things. Probably should change my glasses too. So I could read. I can kind of read.
When last we spoke,
Speaking backwards, that's this one.
yes, but on our Thursday, when the last we spoke, we were
How do
in,
you keep them straight?
I don't really,
Okay.
but I think we finished with the Kohanim's blessing, Birkat Kohanim. So I think we're at the beginning of chapter 7. So Bamidbar chapter 7. Last week we were talking about the notion of bracha, the idea that blessing is a kind of divine energy that is made available to us by God. The Kohanim are a conduit of blessing. They are themselves not the actual source of the blessing. We talked a little bit about their role and in enabling the relationship between us and God. And we talked a little bit about what a blessing was. And now we're on to chapter 7.
I'm sorry, I had to get up. Chapter 7 of what?
Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 7. Okay, this is going to be, we're going to read it as one long section. It is going to be the gifts of the elders, the heads of the tribes, or the elders of the tribes, at the dedication of the Mishkan. So we're just gonna read it in one go. Again, it's a lot of verses, because what ends up happening is each tribe is represented by their elder, and on behalf of the tribe, the elder brings the identical gifts as the other elders of the tribe. So once you've read one, it's pretty much identical for the rest of the tribes. The only tribe that is not represented here is the tribe of Levi. We've talked before about how, I think it was the Ramban Nachmanides in his commentary on the Torah somewhere said that there's always 12. Whenever the tribes are being represented, there's always the number 12. It's not always the same 12. So for instance, there are times when, let's say you're talking about the division of the land. So the division of the land, there are 12 tribes represented. Levi is not represented, but Yosef is divided into two parts, Ephraim and Manasseh. But there are other times when we're talking about the 12 tribes and Levi's included, and instead of Yosef being two, Yosef is just mentioned as one tribe. But it always works out as 12. This is one thing to look out for here. Is there going to be 12 by the time we're finished? Because Levi is not going to be represented here. So let's see how that works out. And also, we've been reading this story pretty much since Exodus, since the Torah has been given. If you're following the narrative, we left Egypt, we traveled a bit until we got to Sinai, and then we have what we call getting the Torah, which is God speaking the 10 commandments, the 10 statements. Then we're hanging around Sinai a bit, waiting for Moshe to come down, and you have the golden calf. Then after the golden calf, Moshe is advocating for the people, and there's a lot of going up and down Mount Sinai. Eventually, he comes back with a new set of tablets. If you work it out, that's Yom Kippur. So they left on Pesach. The Torah is given at Shavuos. The golden calf works out to be the 17th day of Tammuz, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. And then you have a period of a couple months where Moshe is advocating on behalf of the people, and God then eventually gives him the 2 tablets, and those tablets are brought down on Yom Kippur. At some point, the Mishkan is commanded. They're working on getting the stuff together. They're building the stuff, and our tradition is that that is all happening until the month of Nisan, and then at the beginning of Nisan is when the tribes are bringing their the gifts, each one on a different day. And so there's a custom to read every day of, not everybody has this custom, but a lot of synagogues have this custom. Amongst Hasidim, you tend to see this more. I'm not sure what Sfardim do about this, but where you read each day, starting at the beginning of Nisan, you read the gift of a different one of the tribes as you're leading up. So that means that the dedication, what we would call the dedication of the altar, or the dedication of the Mishkan, is happening during this time, what would be during the beginning of Nisan of that. So it would be almost exactly a year from when we left Egypt till when the Mishkan's being set up. So we've had a kind of interruption in the narrative because there was a discussion of how to construct the Mishkan and about gathering the elements of the Mishkan. Then there was a discussion about the sacrifices and elements of the sacrifices and what circumstances sacrifices would be brought. We had discussion about purity and impurity, all the kind of things you would expect to know, you need to know, so that you could carry out the work of the Mishkan properly. Now we're coming back, we're sort of catching up with the story. This story where we're at now is there are elements of it that are even in the end of the book of Exodus. Like at the end of the book of Exodus in Parshas Pekudei, there is some discussion about Moshe setting up the tabernacle and God's presence resting over there. And then in Vayikra and Leviticus, we had the death of Aaron's sons that's happening during the dedication of the altar and the Mishkan. That was on the 8th day. So this is all around that time. This is kind of picking up the threads of this narrative were picked up and then set aside, picked up and set aside, picked up and set aside. We're now back to that same point. So we haven't moved a lot when it comes to the timeline. And so now we're back and focusing on these gifts of the Nesi'im, which are the sometimes translated as the princes or the elders of the tribes. Remember that when, as a Jew in those times, you first identified as by your family, you were next identified by your tribe. You were only then identified as an Israelite, but your first identity is your family. It's called Beit Avotam, the house of their fathers. And then you are identified by your tribe, and then you are identified as a member of Israel. And the kind of national identity, which appears to be sort of intense during the desert experience, gets somewhat lost during the next few hundred years. While they're in Israel, they seem to identify primarily as tribes. There is, obviously, they recognize that everybody's connected as what they would call Bnei Israel, but they didn't really have a national leadership. They didn't really have national identity. They didn't have a king. They did have judges at some points, but if you look at some of those stories in the Judges, even some of those stories that are quite well known, may have only happened to a couple of the tribes that happen to be near each other. They're not necessarily an experience that was had by every single tribe when they were. There are some exceptions, like Devorah. Her thing is an exception. It seems to be national, but so yeah. So back to the tribes. So Vayihi. So does Linda? Do you want to read at this point?
Yeah, I can read just a second.
Okay, so we're going to start chapter 7, verse 1, and it's going to be a lot of reading. You're just going to keep on
Okay.
reading.
I may have to take a break to get a sip of coffee.
Please do.
Okay. On the day that Moses finished setting up the tabernacle, he anointed and consecrated it and all its furnishings, as well as the altar and its utensils. When he had anointed and consecrated them, the chieftains of Israel, the heads of ancestral houses, namely the chieftains of the tribes, those who were in charge of enrollment, drew near and brought their offering before the Lord. 6 drought carts and 12 oxen, a cart for every 2 chieftains and an ox for each one. When they had brought them before the tabernacle, the Lord said to Moses, accept these from them for use in the service of the tent of meeting, and give them to the Levites according to their respective services. Moses took the carts and the oxen and gave them to the Levites. 2 carts, 4 oxen he gave to the Gershonites as required for their service. And 4 carts and 8 oxen he gave to the Merarites as required for their service. And under the direction of Itamar, son of Aaron, the priest, but to the Kohathites, he did not give any, since theirs was the service of the most sacred objects. Their porterage was by shoulder. The chieftains also brought the dedication offering for the altar upon its being anointed, as the chieftains were presenting their offerings before the altar. The Lord said to Moses, let them present their offerings for the dedication of the altar, 1 chieftain each day. The one who presented his offering on the first day was Nachshon, son of Aminadab, of the tribe of Judah. His offering, 1 silver bowl weighing 130 shekels and 1 silver basin of 70 shekels by the sanctuary weight, both filled with choice flour with oil mixed in for a grain offering. 1 gold ladle of 10 shekels filled with incense, 1 bull of the herd, 1 ram and 1 lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, 1 goat for a purification offering, and 1 for his sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, and 5 yearling lambs. That was the offering of Nachshon, son of Aminadab. On the second day, Nathaniel, son of Zuar, chieftain of Issachar, made his offering. He presented as his offering 1 silver bowl weighing 130 shekels and 1 silver basin of 70 shekels by the sanctuary weight, both filled with choice flour with oil mixed in for a grain offering. 1 gold ladle of 10 shekels filled with incense, 1 bull of the herd, 1 ram and 1 lamb in its first year for burnt offering, 1 goat for purification offering, and for his sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, and 5 yearling lambs. That was the offering of Nathaniel, son of Zuar. On the third day, it was the chieftain of the Zebulunites, Eliab, son of Helon. His offering, 1 silver bowl weighing 130 shekels and 1 silver basin of 70 shekels by the sanctuary weight, both filled with choice flour with oil mixed in for grain offering. 1 gold ladle of 10 shekels filled with incense, 1 bull of the herd, 1 ram and 1 lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, 1 goat for purification offering and for his sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, and 5 yearling lambs. That was the offering of Eliab, son of Helon. On the fourth day was the chieftain of the Reubenites, Elazar, son of Shadur. His offering, 1 silver bowl weighing 130 shekels, 1 silver basin of 70 shekels by the sanctuary weight, both filled with choice flour with oil mixed in for a grain offering, 1 gold ladle of 10 shekels filled with incense, 1 bull of the herd, 1 ram and 1 lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, 1 goat for purification offering, and for his sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, and 5 yearling lambs. That was the offering of Elazar, son of Shadur. On the fifth day, it was the chieftain of the Simeonites, Shalumiel, son of Zurishaddai. His offering, 1 silver bowl weighing 130 shekels, 1 silver basin of 70 shekels by the sanctuary weight, both filled with choice flour with oil mixed in for a grain offering, 1 gold ladle of 10 shekels filled with incense, 1 bull of the herd, 1 ram, 1 lamb on its first year for a burnt offering, 1 goat for purification offering, and for his sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, and 5 yearling lambs. That was the offering of Shalumiel, son of Zurishaddai. On the sixth day, it was the chieftain of the Gadites, Eliasaph, son of Duel, whatever. His offering, I should look it up in the Hebrew and I'll say it properly. What's the name?
Deuel. Deuel.
We've made God, Eliasaph, son Ben Deuel. His offering, 1 silver bowl weighing 130 shekels and 1 silver basin of 70 shekels by the sanctuary weight, both filled with choice flour with oil mixed in for a grain offering, 1 gold ladle of 10 shekels filled with incense, 1 bull of the herd, 1 ram, 1 lamb in his first year for a burnt offering, 1 goat for a purification offering, and for his sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, 5 yearling lambs. That was the offering of Eliasaph, son of Deuel. On the seventh day, it was the chieftain of the Ephraimites, Elishama, son of
So see, this is one thing to notice. Notice how they're gonna get it to 12 because Levi's not gonna be used. So now they're gonna have Ephraim, and see how it's Ephraim. If they had just Yosef represented, then you'd end up with only 11 tribes. But since they have Ephraim, we're gonna get to 12. For some reason, and the Abarbanel makes this point, for some reason, they always get to 12 when it comes to the tribe. Go ahead.
Ephraim, Elishama ben Amihud. His offering, 1 silver bowl weighing 130 shekels and 1 silver basin of 70 shekels by the sanctuary weight, both filled with choice flour with oil mixed in for a grain offering, 1 gold ladle of 10 shekels filled with incense, one bull of the herd, one ram, and one lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, one goat for a purification offering, and for his sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, and 5 yearling lambs. That was the offering of Elishama ben Amihud. On the 8th day, it was the chieftain of the Manasseh, Gamliel ben Padatsur. His offering, 1 silver bowl weighing 130 shekels, 1 silver basin, 70 shekels by the sanctuary weight, both filled with choice flour with oil mixed in for a grain offering. 1 gold ladle, 10 shekels, filled with incense, 1 bull of the herd, 1 ram, 1 lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, 1 goat for a purification offering, and for his sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, 5 yearling lambs. That was the offering of Gamliel ben Padatsur. And
Linda,
What?
if you want some coffee, I can take over.
So, you know what I was noticing? If you look at the Hebrew, Padatsur is spelled differently at the end of the paragraph
Yeah,
than at the beginning of the paragraph. Explanation. Look, it says Ben Peda dash Sur, and at the bottom it's Ben Padatsur.
right.
Just
Yeah,
want-
I don't know all the grammatical distinctions when it comes to, there are times when this is happening because of where it shows up in the verse, and it has to do with emphasis. In other words, if it's in the middle of a verse, if it's at the end of a verse, sometimes the vocalization changes when it's in the middle of a verse or the end of a verse. And sometimes you'll see a name spelled with a vav and sometimes without a vav. It's not always clear why these are shifting. Sometimes it has to do with grammatical rules, like if there's a pause in the verse, so there's a different vocalization that, because that vocalization is a longer sound, and therefore when you end on it, or let's say you have a colon or what we would say is a period, you might switch from like a segol to a komats. And it could be that some of this just has to do with the length of pause.
Like punctuation.
Right, with punctuation. So if you have a dash in a name, it could be they're signaling that as well, that the person, that this name is meant to be pronounced with 2 components that are, if it's 2 syllables anyways, maybe there's a bit of a pause in between before you get to the next one. It's not, in other words, the name is not always spelled the same. It depends on where it is in the verse, and
That doesn't seem to be the case here in the Stone Chumash. It's exactly the same.
Right, and mine is also the same.
Well,
but there are times when you'll have dashes in between, and that's what it's signifying. I'm assuming that that's what they're suggesting in your version over there.
I don't know. All right, onward.
Yeah.
Linda, do you
Ninth
want me
day.
to? Okay.
On the 9th day, it was the chieftain of the Binyamin, Avidan ben Gidoni. His offering, 1 silver bowl weighing 130 shekels, 1 silver basin of 70 shekels by the sanctuary weight, both filled with choice flour with oil mixed in for grain offering. 1 gold ladle of 10 shekels with incense, 1 bull of the herd, 1 ram, 1 lamb in its first year for burnt offering, 1 goat for a purification offering, and for his sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, and 5 lambs. That was the offering of Abidan, son of Gidoni. On the 10th day, it was the chieftain of the Dan, Achiezer ben Ammishaddai. Ammishaddai, sorry. His offering, 1 silver bowl weighing 130 shekels, 1 silver basin of 70 shekels by the sanctuary rate, both filled with choice flour with oil mixed in for grain offering. 1 gold ladle of 10 shekels, 1 filled with incense, 1 bull of the herd, 1 ram and 1 lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, 1 goat for purification offering and for his sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, and 5 yearlings. That was the offering of Achiezer ben Ammishaddai. On the 7th day, it was the chieftain of Asher, Pagiel ben Achran. His offering, 1 silver bowl weighing 130 shekels, 1 silver and 1 silver basin of 70 shekels by the sanctuary weight, both filled with choice flour with oil mixed in for grain offering. 1 gold ladle of 10 shekels filled with incense, 1 bull of the herd, 1 ram and 1 lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, 1 goat for purification offering, and for his sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, and 5 yearling lambs. That was the offering of Pagiel ben Achran. On the 12th day, it was the chieftain of the Naphtali, Achira ben Anan. His offering, 1 silver bowl weighing 130 shekels, 1 silver basin of 70 shekels by the sanctuary weight, both filled with choice flour with oil mixed in for grain offering, 1 gold ladle of 10 shekels filled with incense, and 1 bull of the herd, 1 ram and 1 lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, 1 goat for purification offering, and for his sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, and 5 yearling lambs. That was the offering of Achirai ben Anan. This was the dedication offering for the altar from the chieftains of Israel upon its being anointed: silver bowls 12, silver basins 12, gold ladles 12, silver per bowl 130, per basin 70, total silver of vessels 2,400 sanctuary shekels, the 12 golden ladles filled with incense, 10 sanctuary shekels per ladle, total gold of ladles 120. Total of herd animals for burnt offerings: 12 bulls of rams, 12 of yearling lambs, 12 with their proper grain offerings, of goats for purification offerings, 12. Total of herd animals for sacrifices of well-being: 24 bulls, of rams 60, of he-goats 60, of yearling lambs 60. That was the dedication of offering for the altar after its anointing. When Moses went into the tent of meeting to speak with him, he would hear the voice addressing him from above the cover that was on top of the ark of the pact between the 2 cherubim. Thus he spoke to him.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Did a great job. Okay. So there's a couple of things I wanted to focus on. One is something that came up in a Rambam discussion that we were having yesterday or the day before, and that is what are called theophoric names. Theo, T-H-E-O, phoric, P-H-O-R-I-C, theophoric, which literally means bearing or carrying God. So there is such a thing as a theophoric name, and I'm just going to read to you the Wikipedia entry about theophoric names. A theophoric name, which is Greek, embeds the word equivalent of God or God's name in a person's name, reflecting something about the character of the person so named in relation to that deity. Some names of theophoric origin remain common today, such as Theodore, which means the gift of God, apparently, or Jonathan, which means God has given. All right, so that's that. Now we're going to look to Judaism and biblical. Much Hebrew theophory occurs in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament. The most prominent theophory involves names referring to El, which we Aleph Lamed, a word meaning might or power, God in general, and hence in Judaism, God. Names referring to Yud He, a shortened form of the four-letter name. Names referring to Levantine deities, like Hadad, or having Baal in their name. This would not be Jews. So here are examples of people with the name El in their name. Ariel, Daniel, Eliyahu, Elihu, Elisha, Elisheva, Emmanuel, Yechezkel, Gavriel, Yishmael, Yisrael, Yoel, Lemuel, Michael, Nathanael, Raphael, Shmuel, Uriel, Uziel. So God's name is in some manner or form, in this case, it's the Aleph Lamed name, are in a sense embedded in the name. So their name is in relation to God. So now they have names with Yud Hey in them, or and which are a suggestion that that this is suggesting the four-letter name. This is like a shortened version of the four-letter name. That's what they're assuming. So you have Chizkiyahu, Yeshayahu, Yedidia, Yirmiyahu, Yonatan, Yosef, Yoshio, Matisyahu, Michayahu, Nehemiah, Ovadia, Uriah, Uzziah, Yehoshua, Yochanan, Zechariah, and Zephaniah. So, and you have Yehoachaz, Yehoash, Yehozabad, Yehochanan, Yehoyada, Yehoyachin, Yehoyakim. So that has essentially the first three letters of the four-letter name, which Yehonatan has: Yehoshaphat, Netanyahu, Eliyahu, Yirmiyahu. And then you have ones who have the Baal name in it, like Yerubal, which was Gideon's earlier name, but it means he does battle with Baal. Izebel, Jezebel, Ishbal, Belshazzar, Shalmaneser, Sancherev, Nebuchadnezzar, Mordechai, which is from Marduk, Ben Hadad, Hadad Ezer, and okay, and then so anyways, so the point is that this is a kind of convention. The reason they brought it up in an article we were looking at yesterday, we were looking at this article about these two temples that were built in Egypt at the end of the Second Temple period. And they're sort of controversial that one of them is mentioned in the Mishnah. It's called Beit Chonio. The other one is known because of papyrus scrolls that they have from Egypt, that there was a temple built in Elephantine, which I think is in Ethiopia or somewhere near there.
I thought it was in Egypt. Isn't that where like the oldest remains of a synagogue or temple
Okay.
are?
All right, maybe it is.
Maybe
I mean, it was
somebody else-
definitely
you
under
may know
Egyptian
better than
control.
me. I don't know.
No, it's somewhere on the Nile. It's on some delta of the Nile, and it could be that you're right. I mean, it's definitely was under Egyptian control. So so there was a temple built there. So they were talking about whether the people that worshipped in these temples were mixing in idolatry, or was it purely Jewish worship? And if it was purely Jewish worship, how could they be doing it if it's outside the temple? So they were suggesting that in one of these temples, if you look at the names of the people associated with it who were involved in serving in those temples, you don't have examples of foreign gods in their names. And they wanted to suggest that that indicates that these are not people that are worshiping foreign gods, because culturally, if you started to worship foreign gods, their names would creep into your name, because this notion of bringing the names of deities into names, the theophoric name, it's a very strong cultural phenomena. So they were arguing that if the people who were working in these places also served other deities, those deities' names would have crept in to the names that we have seen. This is not, I'm not necessarily saying this is the strongest form of a proof, obviously, but they brought that up. So because when you look at a list of names, and there are all sorts of names that are mentioned in the Torah, and you could do all sorts of interesting comparing and contrasting and studies of the names. One of the things you find in these lists of names are the embedding of God's name in people's names. So if you look at these, you have an Elisheva. There you go. And I am a Yehoshua. I have that in it. So if you looked at the names, so Nachshon does not actually seem to have it. Nachshon ben Aminadav doesn't seem to have it, but let's see here. First one is Nachshon. The second one is Nitanel. So that's that name, Nitanel, like God gave. And then Suar. And then you have the next one is Eliav, which might be Eli, my God is Av, a father, or the father. And then you have on the fourth day, Elisur, my father is like a rock, Ben Shtei-ur, which seems to have the Shin Daled Yud name in it, Shaddai. So there we have representation of the El name and also the Shin Daled Yud name. And then on the fifth day, you have Shlumi El and Tsuri Shaddai. So there you have the El name and the Shin Daled Yud name. And then you have on the sixth day, Eli, Asaf, and Duel. So it has the El name in the beginning and at the end. And then you have on the seventh day, you have Eli Shama ben Amihud. Now, so my God heard that one. Amihud, in the commentaries here, they say it means he praises my people, or it might be loyal, somebody who is loyal to God's people. But anyways, Eli Shama is the God name. And then on the eighth day, you have Gamliel, which has the El name in it. And then, in Padat Sur, Sur is rock. Sometimes rock is a like a kind of nickname for God. In fact, in the Israeli Declaration of Independence, there was a lot of back and forth, apparently, about whether God should be mentioned in the Israeli Declaration of Independence. And they came to a compromise that they referred to the Rock of Israel. The Rock of Israel is the compromise. So the ones who want God to be there feel like he's represented by the Rock of Israel, and the people that don't want God to be in there are okay because it doesn't overtly mention God. So Sur could sometimes be God too. And then you have on the ninth day, you have Avidan ben Gidoni. So that one does not seem, unless it's Avi, my father is Judges, and you're going to say my father is the God reference. On the 10th day, you have Amishadai, the second name has God's name in it. And then you have Pagiel, you have the El name. And then you have, on the 12th day, you have, you don't have it, Achira ben Enan. So, but on a bunch of them, you had the God's name in it. And we see the same thing when you look at the spies, at the names of the spies, you'll see the same kind of thing. Almost all the names end up having something like that introduced. It was interesting. In here, they said somewhere, in later times, he says, the name Yud He Vav He does not appear in theophoric names until the time of Joshua. So we saw El and Shin Daled Yud, but we didn't really see Yud He's in there, representing the Yud Ke Vav Ke name. So that happens in the name Joshua. Moshe changes his name and puts a Hey there. And that's what the spies, that's going to come up. And for the most part, is very rare until the time of King Saul, when it began to be very popular. So that's sort of interesting too. That's seeing about which names are used and at what time they're used and how they're brought in to it.
Rabbi,
yeah.
the changing of Sarah's name, is that a Hey? Is
So it's
Sarai?
a Yud. She's a Yud. And Avraham was a Hey. So between the two of them, you do have Yud Hey. That's a good point. Because Avraham had a Hey added and she has a Yud added. And it certainly is interesting to think of the two as representing God's name between the two of them. So that, yeah, that's good. I like that. Yeah, that's a good point you're making. Yeah, as always. All right. So then also there was a little bit of discussion about the seventh day. This was chapter 7, verse 48. It says, on the seventh day, a Nasi from Ephraim brought a sacrifice. Now that would mean possibly that he's bringing it on Shabbos. And the question is, should they be able to do that? Because this is not, at first blush, you might question whether they should do that. In fact, the Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Avram Ibn Ezra, is writing his commentary. He's around the time of Rashi. Let's see. There's a few Ibn Ezras, but this is Avram Ibn Ezra. Abraham Ibn.
Maybe they built an Eruv. I'm sorry.
No, they actually have to slaughter it. But that would be like that Jon Stewart. Did you ever see that? You know how he had those, he would have on the Daily Show, he'd have a correspondent that would do some deeper dive into some story that was going on. So there was a controversy about the Eruv, like in Westchester. I think it was in somewhere in Long Island.
Oh, yes. And they showed those people, right.
It was so funny. Like he had his, one of his correspondents, whose name I'll remember in a second. He had him go investigate. And at the end of the piece, you see this correspondent wearing a hat. And on top of the hat, there are 4 little poles with wires going around. So on his hat, he has like a little Eruv, and he's eating a ham and cheese sandwich. And somebody, I think Jon Stewart says, you can't eat a ham and cheese sandwich. He said, it's okay, John. I have an Eruv. I'm in an Eruv.
Oh, no.
So anyway, so the whole thing, but he got somehow he got on film. He got somebody to say, we don't want these kind of people coming in to our neighborhood. But it was a Jew. He got Jews to say it because, it's the Jews, because part of the surprising thing was that this was being fought by Jews who were concerned about what kind of people it was going to attract, the kind of Jews it was going to attract. So he actually got somebody to say on film something like that. Like we're concerned about the kind of people it will attract, which is so funny to hear another Jew say.
It was great.
time. All right, so Ibn Ezra, it says, born 1089, died 1167. So he's right after, I mean, he might have been born before Rashi dies, somewhere around there. And then, so he's like right after Rashi. So before, some of the people, like he's before Nachmanides, I think. Yes, he's definitely before Nachmanides. He's, oh no, 1167. Yeah, I think he's before. Nachmanides is in the 1200s. Yeah, so the Rambam is around this time of Ibn Ezra. Rashi has just passed away. Anyways, the Ibn Ezra is a hugely important commentary on the Torah, on Tanakh in general. And he brings up about this subject about Shabbos. He says, there are people who suggest that this means that they brought the offering on Shabbos, and that the rationale for bringing the offering on Shabbos is this is a one-off event. You see this a couple times with dedications to the Beit HaMikdash, where you see it with Shlomo, where he might have pushed aside the celebration of a holiday, possibly, in order to dedicate the Beit HaMikdash. You see certain rules set aside as far as where offerings could be brought in the time of Shlomo at the dedication. And here also you might be seeing, they call it Hora'at Shah. This is a one-off permit. Now, who's giving the permit? It's either Moshe giving the permit or it's God giving the permit, because we did read that God said you should have one, bring one each day. So I guess it would depend on how you interpret it. There were other people who didn't like this, and they said, no, this is not talking about Shabbos. It just means the seventh day from when they began the dedication ceremony. So it's no proof that they actually brought offering on Shabbos, to which the Ibn Ezra says, it doesn't matter if the seventh means Shabbos. At some point, there were 12 offerings. At some point, if they did it every day, one day after another day, one of them was done on Shabbos. It's either this one, which says it's on the seventh day, or it was another one, but one of them was clearly done on Shabbos. So we do see again that there are examples of this for some reason associated with the dedication of the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash. You would think these would be times when they'd be absolutely careful about not changing anything, especially when you see the sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, dying for changing the way things are done. So you would think that they wouldn't change anything, but apparently at the very top, there were things that were changed. So this would be example. This would be an example of one of them.
Rabbi, though, these were things that were just brought to the temple, right? They weren't slaughtered there at that
well,
day.
the animals eventually are slaughtered.
Eventually, but yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, but they are being donated.
This could be their inventory for a while. I don't know.
Right. They're donating, and the wagons they would have used to transport the Mishkan when they're traveling. So everything would be used in the Mishkan, and eventually the animals. Again, the animals could be used to pull something, or they could be used for their wool. It doesn't have to be a sacrifice, but you do see, like it talks about an olah, an elevation offering. So it does seem like eventually they are dedicated for offerings. It's interesting in Linda's translation, the word chatat, which usually is translated as sin or sin offering, was translated as a purification offering in her reading of it. And it could be they're doing that because what sin are they bringing this for? There is this isn't an atonement for anything that happened. So why are they bringing sin offerings? Right. So maybe that's why they're thinking of it more as purification. The Talmud apparently says at one point that this sin offering is that eventually there could be instances where somebody became impure and they don't know it. So this would help to atone for an unknown impurity and entering the Beit HaMikdash impure, but you didn't know you were impure, which they call tumat tahom, like a deeply buried body, which somebody wouldn't know they walked over or something. So this would come to atone for that.
So you couldn't just apply it in general to a purification, because when we were talking about the Nazir and we
Right.
worried about what was his sin and was a hate, maybe it's just a purification.
Right. So you would think that we have enough of these that it would cause you to lean towards the notion that sometimes it's not about a sin. The thing is, they do call it hate. Hate typically means sin. So you'd have to say there's some kind of usage of this term that's not really specific to doing something wrong. But so there are some people that seem to be more open to that, and some people that seem to be less open to that, and are always looking for the sin in all these things, like we saw. Not everybody, like for instance, in the case of the Zav and Zava, we saw that there were a couple commentaries who talked about what the sin might be, but it seemed like a lot of others felt that it wasn't about sin per se. We saw with the Yoledet, with the woman who gave birth, you'll see some commentaries who point to what the sin might have been. But again, you might just say that this has to do with something broader, something closer to the word purification. The Nazir, there was, what sin did they do? So yeah, so it's, you would think after a while that you have enough of these examples to justify thinking differently about this term, but you still will see that the Gemara, not every time, but the Gemara or the commentaries will try to figure out what the sin was.
Right. It would be hard to apply it in the Garden of Eden, the tree. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Right. And also, just to mention, there's a commentary called the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, originally from Morocco, I believe, lived in the 1600s. The Baal Shem Tov considers him one of his teachers, his Rebbeim, even though he never met him in person. He is buried on Mount of Olives next to his wife and two Yavamas. It's a grave that a lot of people visit. He is a very impactful commentary, as you testified by the fact that the Baal Shem Tov considered him his teacher. It's a very impactful commentary. It's a kind of mystical commentary, typically, and studied by certain Hasidim. I have a friend who is a Rajiner Chassid, a Boyaner Chassid, Tzvi Pasikov, and he said that they are encouraged to learn the Parsha with the Or HaChaim every week. Anyway, so the Or HaChaim points out that that the Midrash says that Rebbe Meir and Rebbe Yoshua ben Korcha would actually learn out these names. In other words, they learned these names as a code for some idea. In other words, the name itself is a clue to something. So when and this is an option, you do see this in other places, where you'll have commentaries that will quote other commentaries who do this more for a living, this kind of thing, which is to darshan the name, and that the names are meant to tell us something further, maybe something about the people or something about the times, maybe even to bring in a notion or concept that is somehow related to this discussion. So what do they mean when they do that? Do they mean that these people didn't exist and that these names are metaphors or parables? Like for instance, you could have there's a song called Two Hanged Men Hanging from a Tree. Did you ever hear that song? Two hanged men hanging from a tree.
No.
Yeah, so it's a kind of protest song against capital punishment. And at one point in the story, it says, and the sheriff, whose name was Uncle Sam, like he said, we're going to put an end to these protests. And so that's a kind of metaphor that hits you in the face. You don't have to think much about that. So the question is, when somebody has a name like that, are we meant to take it further? Are we meant to see it as a commentary or teaching or mentoring? And if so, does that mean the person didn't exist? So you would have to say, I think almost all these commentaries who do this would have to say, they're not saying that the person didn't exist, but they're also saying that these names are not coincidence, that we're meant to, in a certain way, darshan everything in life. It could be like these certain close readers of literature like Jacques Derrida and others might say something like this too. In other words, that when you're reading something, you shouldn't assume anything is just happenstance. Like there's influence from all different places in somebody's writing. They're not even always sure why they are including everything in their writing. And therefore you have to assume that everything, every detail is somehow there for interpretation. And so there's everything is a kind of embedded code. And so in a person's writing, you can learn so much about the person, you can learn so much about the time they lived in and the culture that they live in. Again, even if the person wasn't methodically intending to do that, or it just will come through, it will just happen. So you could say perhaps something like that, with the Torah as well, that there is a way of studying Torah where everything is meant to be decoded. Even if you were there, you would just say, I was there. I saw what happened. Everything you're talking about it was nothing. We weren't thinking about any of those things that you're talking about, right? I was there. There's nothing like that going on. And then it's possible that the commentary would say, I know you don't think this was going on, but that doesn't mean it wasn't going on.
It's going on in the background.
Right, and for some reason, God decided to tell the story, or a prophet decided to tell the story. They're not just telling the story because it happened. There's a lot of history that's not in Tanakh. They're telling it because it's a teaching story. And because it's a teaching story, there's going to be, every element's going to sort of be available for teaching. So in that way, you'll see people almost ignore what would be the normal human dynamic of the story and read it in ways that are so removed from what might have been the experience of those two people, but are confidently doing it. And we'd even say to those two people that same kind of thing, like this is, I know you went there and it all went through it, but we're reading it deeper. We're reading it deeper than that. All right, we have to stop. All right, we're also leaving. I'm
Thank
grateful
you.
for the opportunity.
Rabbi, one thing about Sur, you were talking about Petit Sur. It's actually in Shimon, Sur Shaddai is one name, Sur Shaddai.
Nice. Yeah.
The rock of Shaddai. And I liked
Right.
his father though, Shlomiel. I'm sorry. Thank you, Rabbi. Good job.
You're welcome.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Linda. I'll talk to you, Liz. Bye-bye.
Talk to you, Mrs. T.